Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer in Tel Aviv. October 7th, the war in Gaza, and a feeling that not only the state of Israel but Jews themselves are under increasing attack, both in daily life but particularly in the media, has given birth to a new wave of American Jews who have taken it upon themselves to step into the role of online defenders. Some of these new figures, you can call them activists, advocates, influencers, feel like a familiar brand of pro-Israel Hasbaraists. But others, like my guest today, while definitely members of what they call Team Israel, at the same time are doing what they can in these polarized and partisan times to bring nuance to the conversation and are not so easily categorized as falling right or left. My guest, Jonah Platt, whose show, Being Jewish with Jonah Platt, sits at the top of the podcast charts for Judaism-focused podcasts, also makes a point of emphasizing the joys of being Jewish at a time when Jewish identity brings with it so many complications and problems. Platt spoke with me about his pivot from entertainment to Jewish advocacy, about his take on the election of Zohran Mamdani, and how he relates to his celebrity brother, actor Ben Platt. His brother wrote last spring that, quote, "As a queer Jew, my personal connection to Judaism is cultural, emotional, and interpersonal." His brother also wrote that relationship is not defined by the state of Israel and that he feels, quote, "alienated from a lot of people in my earliest community." My conversation with Jonah Platt is coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Jonah Platt, welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. It's very exciting to have you on.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on.
So in this podcast, I want to dig into who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. But our Haaretz listeners are first and foremost interested in the news, very into politics, and American Jews are at the center of a very big politics story right now. It's not often that Israelis are paying more attention to American Jews than the other way around, especially in the past few years. But the election of Zohran Mamdani as mayor of New York, he's mayor-elect now, has really gotten Israel's attention, as you might imagine. You're actually in New York now. You're a Los Angeles person, but you're in the city. But maybe that makes you even more qualified to sort of observe from the outside and reflect on the overall impact of this election, not just for New York Jews, but for American Jews. So how does the campaign and the reaction to his election so far, how is it all hitting you?
So there's a lot to take in, and it sort of depends on what level you're looking at it from. So I'm always a glass half full guy. So I'm looking at it from a wider lens, which is that, yes, Mamdani won. He won with maybe 30% I'm seeing of the Jewish vote in New York. The vast majority of Jews continued to go for Cuomo. And across the country, the Democrats that picked up seats and crushing victories were all far more moderate than Mamdani and won with larger margins. What the great fear is that Mamdani is the tip of some giant socialist wave that's about to overtake America. That's just not really what we're seeing. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is, what we've already seen, which is that Gen Z, younger voters, and more progressive, further left Jewish voters who are all the typical anti-Israel Jewish camp here in America. Those people all came out from Mamdani, which isn't surprising because there has been, sort of in lockstep with how they have felt all along. But also, the biggest issues really here right now are the economy. There's a government shutdown right now going into, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. People don't like it. People are not getting checks. Air traffic control is now being affected, which is affecting people all over the country in meaningful ways. SNAP payments, food stamps not going out. So people are pissed off at that. And there's definitely been a strong rebuke generally of the Republican Party. And I think Mamdani running against Cuomo, who's seen as this establishment guy who did not have a strong vision or message really other than I'm not Mamdani, it didn't resonate with young people. They want free stuff. They want economic relief, and they want it now. And they want a future when they graduate college in a world where AI is taking jobs and cost of living is getting more expensive. And here's a guy who's young and charismatic and says, I'm going to give you free groceries. I'm going to give you free buses. I'm going to give you free childcare. And that's appealing to a lot of young people.
What about people who say that New York doesn't really have a foreign policy, so therefore I may not agree with Mamdani on Israel, and I'm more afraid of what Donald Trump wants to do to New York City, so therefore I'm weighing my two considerations and I'm coming down on the side of Mamdani. You don't think there are Jews like that?
Yeah, I'm sure there are as well. I mean, the same that there are people who voted for Donald Trump who are like, yeah, he said all this terrible stuff and he's mean to women and, he's cheated people in business. And I can live with that because I like X, Y, and Z. I think there's people who probably fall into that camp with Mamdani as well. It's tough when the thing you're ignoring is somebody saying, they don't agree Hamas should disarm, is a pretty pointed point of view to not care about as a Jewish person. But I do think that it's true that there's only so much he's going to be able to affect.
I was impressed by the monologue at the beginning of your latest podcast. Some might even call it a rant. There's lots of cursing in it. You were talking about the reaction across social media from American Jews on the right against Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, a popular Reform rabbi in Manhattan. She just published a memoir for refusing to sign anti-Mamdani petitions and be explicitly against Mamdani in her sermons. You said, quote, I only see this kind of racist, misogynistic, anti-Jew hate spewing forth from Jews on the right. And you said the worst hatred I get on social media, the rudest comments, and the roughest treatment is from fellow Jews on the political right, Jews who pray at the golden calf of Donald Trump. Now, I'm sure a lot of people have and will get their back up at that. But your monologue kind of reinforced my feeling that the Mamdani campaign really split New York Jews and by extension American Jews on whether they fear the far left, for which Mamdani was their avatar, or the far right, this bigotry of Donald Trump and his camp. Do you share that feeling that this campaign really emphasized the cracks in the American Jewish community? Even though you're an optimistic, glass half full kind of guy, I'm interested in your take.
Where I fear sort of anti-Jew sentiment writ large and outside of the Jewish community, I worry about it more from the left for sure. But within the Jewish community, I don't worry about it quite as much because it's small. And what the hate that I get from Jews on the left tends to be this, it mimics the hate that I get from non-Jews on the left, which is that I'm a nepo baby genocide baby killer. Which doesn't really bother me receiving because it's ridiculous and based in just nothing. When I get hate from Jews on the right, it feels more like getting it from my own team. Not that I'm on the right, but that these are the people who I'm aligned with on the Jewish and the Israel issues as opposed to the other ones, and they're still giving me a hard time about things. That's what bothers me.
You're not on the right. You're not on the left. I was trying to suss out your politics because now you're this big influencer in the Jewish world. So I was trying to look at where you stand, and so I looked at another pretty recent monologue at the top of one of your podcasts. And you seem very big on the middle ground or both sides. You said that Netanyahu is somewhere between the self-interested, bloodthirsty monster and sole qualified protector of the Jewish people, that he's a politician who loves his country and wants to save his people, and he also wants to protect his coalition and stay out of jail. You said you wanted a two-state solution. You hope the Likud party loses badly in next year's election. You don't think Netanyahu is the guy to lead Israel's next chapter. You said you approve of certain things the Trump administration has done in regards to Jewish people in Israel, while also disapproving of nearly everything else he has said or done. And very interestingly, you said you're 100% glad Kamala Harris did not win the election, as I believe Jews and Israelis would be much worse off than we are. At the same time, you said you were glad you voted for her so you could have your cake and eat it too. So how would you describe your politics? Left, right, center, confused?
Totally confused. I mean, certainly center, but my politics are sort of being decided for me for the first time in my life, which is strange because I'm sort of being shoved around based on the opinions and actions of people on both sides of me. I have to sort of retreat and advance based on individuals and individual policies and what I'm seeing. I don't really have the luxury of joining a team at the moment because neither team fully aligns with all of me as a person. On the left, the liberal values at the core of what the Democratic Party has been and certainly is in line with what I've believed in my whole life in terms of inclusivity and human rights and equity and things of that nature. And then, as I've already mentioned, all of the majority of the far left of the party is the same as the far right of the Republican Party, which is extremist, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, and so I can't get in with both feet over there, and I can't get in with both feet on the Republican side, which, while being much stronger on Israel and Jewish identity, is not in line all the time with all of my values otherwise. So I'm part of this middle majority, and those are the people that I appeal to the most with my content and with the podcast and what I say online. There's all these people like me in the middle, tons of Jews who have typically been, I think it's something like 70% of American Jews are typically Democrats, and the majority of us are pro-Israel Jews. So we're all sort of feeling this pressure from the left to move rightward and not fitting in quite on the right. I definitely feel like I have more in common with a moderate Republican than I do with an extreme Democrat. The flip side is obvious, so that I obviously would have more in common with a moderate Democrat than an extreme Republican. But the flip side was not always true, and it certainly is true now. So, in terms of the Kamala Harris piece, I get a lot of crap for that I voted for her at all. That's sort of what I'm talking about in terms of the hate from the right. I get a lot of shit for just having done that at all, where people won't even take me seriously or listen to what I have to say. But I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I just found it so abhorrent to vote for at the time of Donald Trump in his first presidency and through his campaigning has been such a, negative human being, and it has unleashed so much negativity in our political discourse and on so many levels. But as I said, I'm glad he won because things would look a lot worse for Jews in Israel had he not. So it worked out for me in that regard. But let me just finish by saying I'm glad there's not a presidential election tomorrow because I don't know who'd be running and I don't know what I'd do about it.
Okay, Jonah, let's circle back now to who you are. You're 38 years old with a long career in entertainment on stage and film and TV, including starring in Wicked on Broadway, which is very cool.
Since October 7th, I've done no performing. But prior to that, I was, actually when October 7th hit, I was starring in a play at a wonderful theater in Los Angeles called the Geffen Theater. And prior to that, yes, doing TV and film, mostly acting, writing as well. Worked for a number of different television comedies and developing musical theater as a composer lyricist and dipping my toe into producing here and there. So all things entertainment until really the last 2 years.
So you're also part of what I would dare say is the most out and proud Jewish family in Hollywood. Your dad's a big-time producer, like big time as in Legally Blonde and La La Land. Your mom's a philanthropist very involved in Jewish causes. Your brother, Ben Platt, became a Broadway phenomenon with Dear Evan Hansen. I saw him in an amazing performance on Broadway in the very Jewish show Parade. You and Ben perform as the Platt brothers, sometimes with your other brother, Henry. And you've never hesitated to sing Jewish songs, even Jewish prayers, talk about your background. I saw an interview with your mom who said she raised you with a strong Jewish identity to protect you from the Hollywood values and teach you to be committed to a community larger than yourselves and to live a grounded life. So day school, Camp Ramah, the whole deal. So you're already pretty Jewishly out and proud. But then in October 2023, something maybe shifts. You write a piece for Variety, Why Hollywood Needs to Explore and Highlight Jewish Joy, not just suffering or idiosyncrasies. Is it a coincidence that this happens in October of 2023? Do you feel like the Jewish joy was needed to counterbalance the Gaza war? How did that all happen?
I had been speaking about Jewish issues and Israel issues since there was violence between Israel and Gaza in 2021. So the spring of 2021 is when I first began noticing that there was perhaps a space for me to contribute something online in terms of filtering the chaos of what was going on in Israel and Gaza for folks to help articulate what people in my community were feeling and they couldn't quite say out loud. Lots of well-meaning people who just didn't know what was going on. So I started to speak out then just to be helpful and learned that it was helpful. And so I continued to do that, definitely very much as a side hustle while I was very focused on entertainment. This was just something I did when something occurred that moved me or, there was a current event, not something I was focused on, but it grew organically over time. And I began speaking on panels and stuff and started to be seen as something of a quote unquote Jewish influencer. And something I had sort of long been speaking about was the rise of antisemitism, which certainly did not begin in October of 2023 and had been growing by leaps and bounds for years leading up to that. There just weren't that many people sounding an alarm over it, but it was happening quite clearly, both anecdotally and in the data. We had a number of violent events here in America around anti-Jew violence. So, things were really growing and not looking good. And as somebody who straddles both the Jewish world very actively and the Hollywood world, I have long been unhappy with what I'm seeing in terms of Jewish representation and portrayal on screen. The only touch point most people on planet Earth will ever have with Jews, who most people have never met and will never meet a Jew, is what they see in the media. And that's typically the news media, which, as we know, is rather unkind generally to Jewish people and to Israel. And TV and film, where the most common types of Jews you see are either Seinfeld Jews, who are sort of bagels and lox, self-deprecating humor Jews who are all white, or rich white, I don't really care and dislike and distance myself from my Judaism Jews like Seth Rogen, or black hat Orthodox, I can't relate to these people at all kind of people. And so, or Holocaust stories. We get a lot of Holocaust stories where Jews are dying or are being saved by non-Jews. So I have long been sort of beating the drum of we need a lot more joyous, contemporary, humanizing Jewish content where people get to learn to fall in love with Jews and relate to them as being just like everybody else. We just need entertaining, humanizing stories that are captivating on their own merits, and the characters happen to be Jewish.
It's kind of coming full circle if you look at the history of Hollywood, which was founded by Jews who hid the fact that they were Jewish, everyone changing their names and not wanting Jewish themes, then moving into the era you describe, Seinfeld, Holocaust, etc. So it's almost like you're generationally, coming full circle to the idea of trying to celebrate Judaism.
I hope so. And look, it's like it's not a judgment on those early guys because I get it. They were all these immigrants and they were just trying to fit in with this new country they're in and establish themselves and get things going. But unfortunately, it's sort of set a tone of let's hide ourselves. Let's secretly put Jewish values into things without naming them as being Jewish. Let's set the pop culture in a beautiful way, but take no credit for it and make sure we disappear from it. And that has remained in Hollywood, that sort of sensibility of we got to lift up everybody else, but God forbid we lift up ourselves because they're going to say terrible things about us and we need to keep our heads down. We need to blend in. But, my feeling is they say horrible things about us anyway. So we might as well celebrate ourselves while we do it.
So now you've got the podcast and this career pivot into being not just an entertainer, but an official, quote unquote, Jewish advocate. Some would call you a Hasbaraist. You've signed the petitions. You're in this Tel Aviv Institute run by Chen Mazig with other pro-Israel influencers. I'm not quite sure if that's a job, or are you comfortable in that space?
Yes and no. I mean, certainly I like to speak up for my people and for truth. I'm not the type of Hasbara that's sort of like, feed me the line and I'll be a mouthpiece and get it out there kind of Hasbara, or that I'm just out there beating an Israel drum all the time. It's one facet of the things that I look at, which by the title of my show is being Jewish. Certainly a connection to Israel and what goes on there is certainly for me intrinsic to what it is to be Jewish. And so it falls under that umbrella for sure, comes up. But I'm not like 100% of the time talking about Israel. And as you quoted earlier, I'm also quite comfortable looking at Israel as it is, which is a country with people in it. And looking at it as a country with a government and the people as people and, warts and all.
I was interested in something you said in yet another monologue in which you said, I think the Israel education I received here in this country was terrible. It's not even that we got a one-sided education. We got a zero-sided education. I didn't learn that Israel was a parliamentary democracy until I was in my 30s, and I went to day school and sleepaway camp and birthright. And when it comes to Israel specifically, I think there has been an aversion to telling the story honestly, warts and all the same way, whether from a desire to focus only on Israel's best qualities and ideals, or a fear that exposing the bad would cause people to shrink away and empower Israel's enemies, or just out of shame. We weren't taught much about Israel, and for a handful of younger Ashkenazi American Jews, that lack of information was seen as a betrayal and a nefarious attempt to obfuscate the truth. And that's provided a pathway for the ideas of truly nefarious anti-Israel enemies to take hold, whether overtly or unconsciously. I think had we just acknowledged all of Israel's shortcomings, as well as its many triumphs from the outset, and just been real with people, a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment among young Jews today would not exist. So how did you end up where you are, given what you describe as this problematic education on Israel?
I had to do my own education, and that's leaving it up to people to fully educate themselves is a dicey proposition because I am somebody who cares deeply and is very studious and I read voraciously. And I'm coming at it from a place of genuine curiosity. And again, as I said, a foundation of love. That's not going to be the same for every person. A lot of people are not going to do the deep digging. And, this is something I've been saying a lot lately and noticing a lot lately is that if you're going to be an anti-Israel Jew in America, by design, you're not doing a lot of deep digging. You're just not a deep digger. It's impossible to hold a lot of the beliefs that these people have if you've looked at everything laid bare on the table and truly examined it in the light of day. You're coming to these conclusions because you only looked into it shallowly and you heard this person said this and that person said that. And you go, okay, that's good enough for me. That's right. So I'm going to say that too. So when we don't provide the education, the term in academia is null education. When something is not discussed at all, you're basically telling people, go figure it out for yourself. And then they turn to TikTok and they turn to influencers and they turn to whoever their buddies. And then it's a dice roll. So I've been greatly interested and I am just of the mind, if I'm going to make an argument or stake a claim to anything, I want to make sure I'm looking at it from 360 degrees. I don't want to put something out there and not feel really confident or comfortable that I have considered it very closely and been able to make the other side's argument about it before I come to my own held belief. I don't want to take anything for granted. So it's always been important for me to see things warts and all, and to really look at things from all sides and read politically, read from the right, from the center, from the left, listen to Jews talking from the right, from the center, from the left, really considering everything. And that's sort of why, as we talked about earlier, politically, I'm very like pick and choose, because some things jive with me and other things don't. I'm not going to be able to take all of one thing. The world's not black and white. Like, we know this, and yet we often like to sort of operate it as if it is, despite knowing the fact that full well that it is not.
October 7th and the Gaza war has divided many Jewish families. And your brother Ben has come down, much further left than you. He's written very similarly to Hannah Einbeiner in "I'm a proud Jew. I identify as Jewish, and I don't want the bad actions of Israel to ruin Judaism." He said that after your father asked Rachel Zegler, who was in one of his films, Snow White, to take down a Free Palestine social media post. So I'm asking you, just because Ben has come down in a very different place than you and your father, presumably provoking some interesting conversation around the table at Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah or Passover. Can you address that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about that generally. It's in line with everything we've discussed already today, in that, and on my podcast, which I appreciate you listening to so closely, I spoke about this in terms of the song "Pink Pony Club" by Chappell Roan. And I use that as a parallel for how a lot of, especially Gen Z or younger millennial Jews have gone in this direction. In the song "Pink Pony Club," the narrator leaves her home in the South, leaves her mama, goes to West Hollywood to the Pink Pony Club, where she can dance all day and all night with all the boys and all the girls, and everybody can be queen, and that's where she belongs. That's the lyric. That's where I belong. And she still talks to her mom and loves her mom and misses her, but like, this is her place. That to me is a lot of what has happened with younger Ashkenazi, Gen Z millennial Jews in this country. And I say Ashkenazi not because it's some sort of intrinsic like DNA thing for Ashkenazi Jews, but because generally those are more assimilated families, and Sephardi Mizrahi Jews have far more recently fled persecution and understand more deeply the value of a place like Israel, don't have the privilege to ignore the value of a place like Israel. So Soviet Jews also fall in that category. But these are folks who really their number one social group is the progressive left circle that they have chosen to inhabit. And for example, that's where you're seeing, Queers for Palestine. It's this is my crew, this leftist crew. And yes, I still love you at home, Mom. I still love my home Jewish community that I grew up in, that I'll always have sort of fond memories of. But generally, these are, and I'm speaking generally, this is not for everybody, but generally, these are Jews who, they're not doing Shabbat every Friday. I read an article recently that somebody's disclaimer to, like, their claim to why they could speak about Mamdani Jewishly was, I sent my kids to Jewish preschool. Like, that was their big Jewish identifier. As if that sort of then qualified them to be a light on all things Jewish. So you get people like that who are not really super deeply engaged, other than the anti-Israel piece of it, which has become the pillar of their Jewish identity, and fond sort of familial ties to the communities that they grew up in. But when they step forward and say something against Israel or pro-Mamdani, at home, all the Jews were going, oh my God, they're going against the community. They aren't really. They're standing up for their chosen community, where everybody is looking to them and saying, great, good job for you for saying that. You're saying the things we all agree with, and we appreciate you standing up in this way. And they're going against their home, their parents, the old community that they love, but is not what they most care about or what they most prioritize.
Your family's still holding it together, though, I hope.
Of course. I mean, it's always family first. And there's no ideological disagreement of any kind that would ever change that. And as I say to people, like, no matter who you are, you're not solving the Middle East crisis over this cup of coffee right now. So let's all just take the stakes down a little bit and see each other as people first and deal with the rest of it later. And look, if there are people with whom it is high stake and it's important and you're not going to be able to get past it, you can love each other anyway. They don't have to be your best friend in the whole wide world. You can keep some sort of distance in your heart in a certain way, but they don't need to become your enemy and they don't need to tear families and friendships apart.
So, Jonah, final question. I looked at your first podcast and you said that your goal was to help people answer one key question. What does being Jewish mean to you? So, Jonah Platt, what does being Jewish mean to you? And does it mean the same thing to you as it meant before October 7th, before the Gaza war, and before you started your podcast? Or now does it mean something different?
Wonderful question. Until recently, when people have asked me that question, as I do get asked it, obviously, because of the title of my show, my knee-jerk answer has always been family. That being Jewish to me, the tree trunk of my identity has long been family. As you alluded to earlier in this conversation, I was raised never not feeling Jewish. As I became a husband and became a father, thinking about, okay, how am I bringing my Jewish values and identity into those roles and building my own Jewish family, very family focused and family centric, which is a beautiful thing and is not gone. But over the last 2 years, I've also come to really believe that what it means to be Jewish is responsibility, a sense of responsibility. Going, into the biblical religious side of things, that is the covenant that the Jewish people that we accepted at Mount Sinai was, yes, we're going to take this thing on. We are going to try to uphold this moral code and perform these mitzvot and live through the world in a certain way with this sense of responsibility. And as Jews, it gets hit again and again and again. We are meant to be responsible for everything, how we think, how we speak, how we act, for ourselves, for our families, for our community, for our enemies, for the stranger, for the world. It's just responsibility at every level. And I think that's what differentiates Jews from others. We can all be like every moral person on earth does tikkun olam. It's like you don't need to be Jewish to know what's a clear sense of right and wrong and to want to do good works of charity out in the world. That we don't have a monopoly on that. But I do think where Jews differ is this sense of responsibility at all times for all things and all people. And that's just not something everybody else takes on. I think that's something special, and I think it's something to aspire to and to work on every day. And the more we strive to do that, the better we each are as individual people, the stronger we'll be as a community, and the better we will leave this world than we found it.
Then do you think we can't really complain when the world is holding us to high standards and expects us to behave better maybe than other countries in the Middle East or, Africa, Asia, and not say, oh, we live in a rough neighborhood, we have to be rough. Expect us to behave better than we do or than we have?
It's yes and no. And so yes, in the sense that, and yeah, I actually talked about this in my quote unquote rant from this week, that, the hypocrisy of Jews pisses me off more than other people. Because yes, we are supposed to be holding ourselves to a higher standard. So if you're going to claim, yes, I'm at this high standard, and then drag a rabbi through the mud, that pisses me off. Then you're smearing our good name. So yes, I do agree with it there. And then no, I don't agree with it because, again, actually, as I talk about in this monologue, you look in the Torah, we've got the Tower of Babel, we've got Sodom and Gomorrah, we've got the golden calf. It's like we are very clearly told with a mirror, hey, Jews are fallible human beings. They're going to mess up. They're going to not live up to their ideals. They are human beings just like everybody else. It's a yes and a no. It's intrinsic to being human that you're not going to get everything right. It's impossible. You're going to be a hypocrite at some point. You're going to fail in your moral duty. And we as Jews still have to continue to push that boulder up the hill at all times and should do our very collective best to be the best that we can.
Jonah Platt, host of the podcast Being Jewish with Jonah Platt. Really, it was a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Jonah Platt, and to producer and editor Nara Malkin. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a 5-star rating. That way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Allison Kaplan Sommer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.